Please stand for anthem. Be seated for the adjustment of the chat capture window, as I recognize is now slightly not aligned. There you are. And the arrival of the thing. We're building the thing. New fresh thing. Fresh cardboard cube of object. That was a thing that existed. Here is another that is shaped like ceci n'est pas un tank. A voiture. However it is. Just glossy enough that you can see the book that I'm propping the camera up on. Interesting. It is one M3 Lee. US medium tank, produced early in the World War. One of those tanks from that era wherein many designers of armament were not quite sure what they were doing yet. We need a gun on treads and some kind of box to envelop it. It has, you know, parts that swivel and move, and maybe do you want more than one gun? We have several sizes of gun. This fellow up here certainly seems to be in the expected state of mind for having been granted command of what do I do with this? What is this? Is there anybody in there? Am I even in here? Anyway, let's start the many hours of amalgamated patriotic tunes of national flavor. And get ready to unbox this thing. And slowly commence the discussions. Yeah, grab objects. Yeah, glue, files, cutter, threat of crafting knife, should it become necessary. Even if so, probably not for a while. To sort of begin the ongoing stream of historical trivia, I'm just gonna go ahead and open with a lovely fact that I myself did not know until getting ready for this build and stream. That being that that name, Lee, and a lot of the other names that are associated with American-made vehicles and weaponry used during the World Wars weren't actually come up with by their developers or by the US military. To US arms manufacturers and the arms manufacturers and the people they were working for, this, just the M3 sufficed. It's here's tank number 3 of this line, just Type 3 medium tank. The third one we built we built tank, then we built more bigger tank, then we built better more bigger tank twice. So here we are at the M3. However, they follow the same methodology for every sort of vehicle they were building and every sort of weapon they were building for army use in general. All over the place. At the same time, such that different things would have the same mark number coexisting with each other. So like this M3 medium tank was being shipped out to allied nations for use as a stopgap vehicle at the same time as the other M3 light tank was also being sent around to the same clients. And the English, upon receiving the shenanigan of too many things with the same name, were just like, no, you stop that, no, things have names. Name your tank, son. You built this. You built this beautiful monstrosity. You have to own it now. It's yours. Take pride in it. You could have been building Matildas. We were going to send you the plans for the Matilda. We'd be happy with Matildas. We already know they work, but no, you had to build your own, and here it is. Now you have to take it in. You have to adopt this. Look at this creature you've created. And so they just kind of asserted a naming scheme of U.S. Civil War generals and other figures from the time. And so the Lee, the Sherman, the Stuart, and some others were handed their names by their weird uncle. Grandpa had to name his beautiful medium-armored children. And this one kit is provided by Tamiya. Well, pretty well the other major manufacturer of historic whatchamajigs. I believe they also build anime things. And while this vehicle is quite goofy looking and quite how do we tank in terms of how it was put together, it had an abundance of flaws, these lovely rubber treads here, that we'll eventually be applying to it. The one thing it did not skimp on was a relatively important one, and something that was very much called for, and so while it was a horrible monstrosity in a whole bunch of ways, it was ahead of the curve in just the one very important metric of a gun. Sure, this thing was very terribly awkward to maneuver around, it wasn't particularly fast, it was lightly armored. When the armor did survive hits, the rivets would pop off of it and bounce around the interior of the cabin, perforating the crew. And it would have to take those hits to the body and the crew because the positioning of the cannon meant that it could not move into hold down position and take cover behind things, etc., etc. The gun was much larger and more powerful than what was the norm on other vehicles at the time, and thus, in addition to hitting harder, could engage from longer ranges than other tanks were used to. So a lot of the time, it didn't even have to close in to the danger zone. Despite all of its flaws, it was still sort of praised by its enemy as being a remarkably dangerous vehicle, though maybe they were just putting that in, you know, the opening phrases of the memo by which to request funding for another, even bigger tank. It had a main gun that was quite good, just positioned quite poorly. They were made on, essentially, the Lee exists because America was planning to build the Sherman already, but arms manufacturers were not yet prepared. They didn't have the necessary tools and expertise and infrastructure set up to make a vehicle that would have a turreted 75mm gun. The important working knowledge just was not present. Let's trade positions of those. We can look at that's looking to be our undercarriage there. There's our main upper hull piece. Here's various bits and bobs. You can see there from the turrets, some of the armor bits in this sprue. The fellow who's going to be staring out from the top of this thing, and his arms. At least he's been positioned so that maybe he can see his arms out of the corner of his eyes. as he sits here in plastic frame hell, waiting to be set loose to his fate of driving a Sherman. Well, more commanding if he's going to be up top, but not a Sherman, a Lee. Sherman would come later. Sherman is the tank they wanted. Lee is the tank they got until then. British officers got a look at the prototype, reviewed it, put in their feedback on the subject. It's terrible in every way. We'll take 6,000. They needed vehicles and could not afford to be particularly picky about what they were. Just put gun on tracks and send it to war. Here's all our lovely drive wheels. And various other bits of machinery. Yeah, those are bits of suspension. Yes, this is mostly a drive sprue. And up over here on this one. Yeah, more bits of the frame. And some of the small fiddly parts. Those are all sure to have wonderful homes. As this is a model that's being built at a much larger scale than the previous one, there are going to be fewer weirdly small fiddly bits. More things are going to be much closer to, within tolerance of human hands' ability to handle. And let us apply more light. Yeah, that'll behave itself, especially since this has a darker base color. And then that almost glossy light gray that was present. And we get to encounter the good fortune of instructions for miniature things being largely pictorial in nature, since, unlike the previous Euro-made model kit, this one is written only in Moonspeak. So we'll be operating entirely via diagram. Numbers and pictograms are universal. Actually, I will immediately place foot in mouth, because right underneath the moon instructions are in fact a set of English instructions. Good stuff. I sold you short, Tamia. My apologies. To your packaging department. All manner of lovely historic flavor, and also another set of the relevant glyphs. Very good. Including, in case one were not familiar with the subject and needed particular instruction, how to assemble a human. Given the appropriate parts, knowing the appropriate means of assembly, and color scheme for one human. Be sure that you accurately use the historic colors for American humans during wartime. Yeah, the Lee was adequate at the moment that it was made, which was the gap between the start of the war and when all the really good next generation mediums got built. These were heavily used for Lend-Lease, and by the time the Lee started getting to Russia, Russia had finished the T-34 and was starting to ramp up production of them. So they received these and were just like, what is this? Is this what capitalists use for war? No wonder you're having trouble over there. And we have a lovely set of decals over here as well. Some stars, some numbers, some stripes. Those will all have to find their way onto the vehicle at some point. For now, they rest comfortably in the void. And let's clear the workspace and sort out which pieces will be needed first, so that we can begin the construction. It looks like the instructions would like us to start off with the suspension. So we have use for you, and not you, or you for a while. Yeah, the Lee got its debut, like I mentioned, it's 75mm main gun at a time when other competing vehicles, the norm was like 30 to 50mm for cannons, so this thing was able to perform quite well in the one metric. In a very important metric, but still just the one. Many of them were still outmaneuvered, perforated and crushed and burned. It was not the tank anyone wanted, but the tank they had. Just 6,000 armored fighting vehicles improvised together out of gum and string. Alright, so pieces involved at this phase. Yeah, wheels, suspension bits, these fellows over here, and you as well. Helpful element to play here for Tamiya's kits. The sprues themselves have a label in addition to the part numbers on the individual bits inside. So yeah, this is sprue C, and all the item numbers I'm being told to look up are C whatever. And it's looking like they were courteous enough to arrange pretty much all of the things for the first couple of steps in this one sprue. Very thought out on their part. Methodical. So we're just going to be snipping or folding pretty much everything out of here and getting it on the table. Yeah, a bunch of C1 wheels. And the framework of the Lee, like the chassis, the underlying foundations, did eventually find further use as a platform on which to build other not frontline combat vehicles. It was used as the foundations for, you know, artillery and other support weapons that were okay with being awkwardly shaped, because if they were face to face with the enemy, something had already gone terribly wrong. There's our collection of wheels. Yeah, for the rest of this assemblage we need parts 7, 8, 9, and 10. Excellent. So these little fellows over here. And it's looking like all of them will be put to use. So these are for me, and there's some of these wheels were more different wheels. Should be easy enough to spot once we get around to it. Yes, it's these fellows here with the caps. The idler wheels, just the two of them, the rest up front. So yes, all of you belong together. Those two belong over there, alongside the number 6 bits. The 4s and 3s. Well, I'll leave more of those in place and just focus on getting one segment cleaned up and assembled first. All these C9s and these C10s. Actually, most of the parts have been favorably positioned for just wiggling out of the sprue rather than cutting. But yes, these were built heavily to be a placeholder and then quickly become a hand-me-down once Shermans existed. They just gradually got passed around to different fronts and theaters and used by anyone who wasn't important enough to receive the new stuff. You know, having considered that bit of trivia now about their existing a German general who complimented the Lee on its performance, it wouldn't be surprising if there existed somewhere in all the vast web of paperwork at least one person who was willing to try and play up the latest enemy vehicle as being an astounding, unstoppable fighting machine, and then proceed to argue for more funding. Or using this to try and drum up an excuse for why some other operation had gone poorly. Why, of course, sir, we would have taken the objective, but the enemies arrived on wings of light, wielding a sword of flame. They've constructed the angels of the apocalypse themselves. I'd advise the rest of the departments to prepare for the end of days, for surely we face the ultimate weapon. If we just wait a few months, surely the enemy will destroy themselves with such a powerful machine that will go rogue. The instructions are also once again advising regarding various bits that they feel should be pre-painted before assembly. In particular, a lot of these wheels, they suggest rendering an appropriate flat black before getting them insinuated into the machine. I already have some thoughts of my own about the color scheme of this thing, though, so they may one day face a very different fate than what the designers may have intended. What a beautiful vehicle. And that little fellow there is number 8. Which I have these several who finally look like something I'd rather cut than bend. These folks here. Tank design was a wondrous thing, though. Yet another weapon system that got to have this substantial era between when it was first devised and when it was really put to the test, during which rapid advances in technology changed what was even possible, and the absence of any sort of practical trial to put it against meant that people weren't sure what they were getting into until it was finally set in motion. That is the prompting to go ahead and start gathering together images of shenanigans tank designs from throughout the interwar. Bring out your finest Bob Semples. Although the Semple's not an interwar design, that's a publicity stunt design. An entirely different tier of vehicle. Let's just settle in and do a bit of filing. All sorts of bits meeting their ends, smoothed down in preparation. Which half are the tracks? Yeah, get your Bob Semples, get your tankettes, get all your vehicles together. The joys of military innovation. It's like the early age of flight as well, all the not quite planes that were attempted both before and after the first successes started to give people some direction as to what made sense. Stuff that's more of an art than a science. So what, it has tracks as like a transmission system? Apparently these are still supposed to have a bit of a ridge on them, and that part of it will end up so deep inside of the frame that it won't particularly matter how they look. still review that in more detail before considering. Ah, someone weaponized a shed. Nice. So what is going to end up happening, just to kind of eyeball together one unit of this. Road wheels, one little transmission fellow, one of these, and one pair of side bits. Hopefully like so. Yeah, orient that up, and yeah, something like that is going to come together for a set of road wheels. All the wheelie bits rotating freely within that setup. Ah, Zartank, the wheel machine. Mighty Russian war bicycle. The penny farthing of death. Trying to be fairly gentle with these, as they are, you know, wheels, and thus actually circular as they are right now, and any overzealous filing would create some irregularity in them. Just touch nothing but the sprue. Underwater nuclear tank. The historical Metal Gear. Excellent. Oh man, the flat tanks. Those are their own weird design principle. And the demonstration of the tiny mouse. Later, they will proceed to demonstrate, just take him over to the next field over, where they've prepared the crew of hamsters that they've trained to operate that vehicle. Now hey now, that's a good vehicle. Silly guns only here. That one's actually practical. That's one that just understands the need for more guns. If you want a silly minigun tank, go find one of the ones that has like 20 machine gun turrets. Because that's what tanks are for, right? Delivering small arms. Just a mobile pillbox. Alright, let's just streamline something here. Go ahead and repost those links. There you go. Go ahead and make the tank 2 tanks. Now there's a tank for the working man. A nice sporty commuter tank. War orb. Orb delivery vehicle. It's very important to be able to recover one's spheres effectively after battle. The logistics trains of sorcerers. Truly astounding. Yeah, Tortuga is back and still looking like a prop out of some sort of adventure serial. Utility, but for whom? Like, she looks appropriately baffled to be seated in that thing. Yeah, I don't believe minefield clearing. That's some sort of tactical hairdryer. That one's an all-terrain TV camera. That nice battlefield close-up. That's concept art for a Dalek. That's from XCOM Terror from the Deep. My playthrough of which will be starting on the evening following the day that this stream was broadcast and recorded. There, now we're talking. That's a proper gun carrier. And that one had a little too much to drink. Yes, little-known footage from the wartime episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine. That friendly war train. That's the raft they used to have at my uncle's cabin before it, you know, started to rot out and they had to drag it out and put it out of its misery. Another fine sporting war bicycle. That's what the Founding Fathers had in mind for your right to keep and bear arms there. Alright, that's all the road wheels. Exactly what was envisioned. Ah, cubist fighting vehicles. Yeah, that one's throwing up the horns. Little palate cleansing vanilla tank. Just an armored fighting vehicle having a refreshing meal. These wheels, they're being elusive, I'll say. How far off did I launch that one? Not far at all. I don't know about that one, but it's a bit short. Are you sure we'll get enough muzzle velocity? Ah, the tank silencer. Perfect assassination weapon. That's what happens when you go back in time and describe a tank to someone in, like, 1890. It's like a sort of war train. Yes, good. Track smart car. Alright, that's a bunch of those smoothed up. Now you see, the beauty of that cylindrical design is your enemy will have no idea which way the vehicle is facing. You can move in any direction at any time. Oh hey, what's up, Shagahad? Classic fighting orb. You see, there's a lot more that designers can get away with when they only need to plan for their vehicles being used in Popular Science magazine. It's a very permissive battlefield in cut corners. The wars of the imagination. Ah, yeah, there we go. There's a vehicle that was made with, They didn't want to admit that they'd forgot to put a transmission into it. They figured the 1-gear ratio they'd need and just build bigger wheels to accommodate it. Very pleasantly square gun vehicle there. And the surviving world. Less round in execution than in concept. Compromises had to be made. Yeah, that one's weird. The Swedes use that, don't they? It's designed to, like, hoist itself up on hydraulics in order to angle the gun. You hide it behind hills and then just kind of just pop yourself up. It peaks. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. The gun is pointing backwards. The engine is set up to drive best in the other direction. A vehicle built entirely for fighting retreats. The ghost of Mussolini sheds a single tear. Ah, land zeppelin. I like that the artist has shown it knocking over a more sensible looking tank. Just, oh, Vickers thinks they know how to design a war machine. Get out of here. cruise this. Alright, I think I'm running out of bits to smooth with these initial items, so we can get around to attempting to snap them together. So, yes, one of these, and one of these. Get them all piled up and settled. You guys are for later. Idlers, you know what you're doing. Couple road wheels. These, one of these. Ah, nice armored mail truck there. The fires of war will not prevent your parcels from arriving on time. Postage or perhaps the milkman. And hello, Liberty Bell March. Actually, some of the design hasn't been clear on as to whether these bits are snap or cementable. Because, I mean, I would forgive them making this part of the vehicle snap-based rather than glue-based, since you do want to keep the wheels able to spin freely. Having glue around that would create unnecessary risks. So let's just lay two of these against each other and see what happens. Well, they certainly fit clean. Shown here the various acts of desperation that made the Sherman, or made the Lee look like a good idea. The Sherman was an actual decent idea. Maybe time for goo. Alright, let us begin gunk-related experiments. But am I absolutely sure? Ah yes, the show tanks, trained for jumping. There's the sample. Thanks, Bob. What a vehicle. More a parade float than a tank. Alright, this will be the one grand attempt. See if these bits just snap. So if they don't cooperate for that, then there's going to be very delicate adhering needed. Man, what an awkward piece to throw together. All just to put a pair of wheels. Gotta assemble 6 of these. Ah, look at that healthy film that's formed inside of the glue tube. A healthy husk of cement. Just turning up the ventilation. I'll give myself a few tentative dabs. Alright, let's see how well this works out for us. Alright, that's you finally looking like you're embedded into the right spot. Maybe. Material's a bit flexible. Accepting of angles that really shouldn't want to be thrown together at. We have weird, mangled, bendy wheels. Potentially. We'll see if we can force this into cooperation. Come on. Well, this is one of the few environments where snap is a good noise. Something clicked. Something is where it fits. Yeah, how to make everything else agree with that click. Alright, that's a firm maybe. A healthy, probable first batch of road wheels. In one piece, tentatively held together. To greatly accelerate the progress of the others. You've solved important design questions, like what and no, really, what? Pardon? Just needed you to clarify. I could have sworn you just said sponson on the subject of the main gun. I thought you said, and you surely couldn't have meant. Ah, the indecisive tag. Alternatively, just a motorcycle wearing a false tank exterior. A decoy. Slowly, a workflow emerges. Ah yes, tanks that were equipped with carrier pigeons! Before the advent of the radio, how else will you speak with others over great distance if not by bird? The latest in wireless technology. Okay, round 2. Oh, right. This fellow. Slip you in there, it was. As if we'd planned it that way all along. It's probably exactly the sort of part that would appreciate some supportive tape. Just to keep steady pressure on the bits as they fuse. Let's go digging for that. It's not an extensive dig, it's kind of right there. Some digs are easy. Just don't let that appear in the initial report, or you will have your funding cut. At all times, headquarters must believe that the slightest relaxation of policy will result in dire peril. Unfortunate this one managed to take on a bit of goo. The one gummy wheel. Yeah, it just needs a little bit of encouraging. Just be sure they get regularly spun while they're settling to prevent any proper fusion of unwanted parts. Okay, next wheel. Incorporating all of the lessons that hopefully someone was learning, perhaps in post, during the assembly process of the previous wheels. Attempting custom jobs and full-on kit bashes is something I certainly intend to attempt to perform in the future, but first just need to ensure that all appropriate tooth cutting has occurred already on more sensible builds. Boat with wheels, a far more advanced structure to attempt. A Zeppelin was basically garbage. Come on, wheel assembly. You're not even trying to line up. You know why we're here. Not fooling anyone, wheel assembly. No one is going anywhere until you are properly fitted into place. Okay, third wheel assembly. Tentatively settling in. Yes, this one, the problem, gummy wheel. Just gotta keep him spinning. Do not let him fall asleep. If anything, I might be able to... be able to help get it a bit more leeway just with a quick scraping of the knife around the axle. Help make sure that any tentative bonds that are trying to form properly disintegrate. Now that's not any kind of tank. Get back on topic. This is not open season on all forms of goofy hypothetical weapon. Only the armored, wheeled, and treaded varieties. So our Lee here, maybe attempt to wander back into some historical rambling. It, for the most part, got to have its chance to contribute as a notable fighting vehicle in North Africa. By the time many of the other fronts were stepping up or starting to receive Lend-Lease vehicles after already being active on their own, it would be time for the Sherman. So North Africa was one of its largest places where it got to shine, just getting deployed against a bunch of other earlier vehicles that had not stepped up to the 75mm armament standard. Lighter German vehicles, Italian vehicles, and so forth. And a sizable wave of them got handed off to units in India, who then participated in the fighting in Southeast Asia. And they did pretty well there as an infantry support weapon against a largely not mechanized Japanese army. They just needed a, well, to go back into some design talk, one of the reasonings behind the use of multiple different sorts of cannon on the tank, which was not something unique to the Lee at the time, was the thought that the different cannons would be better suited for the different types of ammunition that you're using out of a tank. Where in particular the two very different sorts of thing that a tank is going to be engaging on a battlefield. Soft targets, hard targets, that demand very different sorts of bullet that want to be thrown, preferentially at higher or lower speed, that benefit different amounts from being raised or lowered in caliber. And everything about the shape and size and length ratios of a cannon affects all the characteristics of the bullet that's going to be thrown out of it. So the thought was sort of the one cannon for the armor piercing, and the other cannon more for your explosive shells. But yes, it was then in Southeast Asia used a fair deal as an infantry support tank against soft targets, and it performed reasonably well there. On most of the main fronts, though, it was very quickly declared obsolete, but still kept around just because it existed. Bad tank is better than no tank. Yes, targets for the M330. Things you will overpen and things you will bounce off of. Good day. Oh, that's far more gunk than I had intended to dispense. Trying to lay a little bit of it on there, but for the most part, that's a slight loss. Goo tubes become increasingly unwieldy the longer they exist. This one came together largely smoothly. Both the wheels seem to have gone a bit gummy, though. It will all need to be tended carefully. And of course the standards for what sort of ammunition and like characteristics you would want to deal with the target would change as the targets themselves changed in response to the ongoing back and forth arms race. Different thickness and composition and positioning of armor. All of various things you're attempting to face. Well, Lee did not have to face them long. So yeah, then got like the Lend-Lease Lees that were sent into the Soviet Union were very quickly scoffed at and shuffled off to secondary theaters where their own vehicles would do the heavy lifting on the main fighting fronts, since they had their industry sorted out and their designs were quite capable. And Lee saw limited use just all over the place elsewhere. Just anywhere where people would be using tanks, but not necessarily always getting the most up-to-date, shiniest and strongest of vehicles. I think they were involved in a couple of assaults on Pacific Islands. Four-wheel assemblies down. Just have to stay vigilant. On some models, there were two people in the turret on the Lee. Particularly the earlier ones. Later ones scaled back the number of roles. Slightly downsized the crew. In particular, the initial production version of the Lee did not have... It only had one radio in it, whereas later versions would have two, so that the person up the top would have a separate line of communication, and they would need some sort of go-between passing information within the tank. It was one of the design flaws that had to be pointed at by the English while they were reviewing the prototypes. All understandable mistakes in the context of, you know, crazy new high-tech form of warfare, in which very few groups had had the luxury of getting practical experience and how everything fit together. Look, you want to keep your bullets as close to the gun as possible. That way you save time reloading. That's optimizing. Maximize your DPS. motorcycle cannon, good times. I think those were meant to be para-dropped. That's part of all the space saving there. Just an extremely lightweight way to deliver a moderately sized cannon. And the equipment needed to move it. And yes, you are supposed to dismount before firing the gun. I do not doubt that at least one person tried and was horribly burned for it. Used as an example to the others. One sacrificial dope. Oh man, that's a sizable bit still on this wheel. How did you escape filing? You're the one who jumped off that table, aren't you? A deserter. Shameful. Make yourself presentable before you meet the enemy. Because before you meet the enemy, you meet me. True opponent. The QA board. Many performance reviews await you. Yes, exceptionally long barrel cannons, usually on tank destroyers. Since the principle in effect there is, you know, a cannon, you bottle an explosion and use that to push something. So the longer the barrel of the gun is, the more time that your explosion spends constrained behind your projectile, and the more energy you will get out of a given size of charge. So, supposing everything else is held constant, a longer barrel will throw a projectile faster. Just because it's more efficiently using the thing. Something like that. I am not an arms manufacturer. Do not quote me on anything. Always remember to regularly walk your road wheels. Don't let them get lethargic. I didn't know you could make a tank with Habsburg chin, but I guess there it is. What a noble vehicle. Lee also wasn't the only name that the M3 went by once it got relabeled. In particular, once they kind of... There was like the version as it first started getting built, and then the modified version that started to correct a bunch of the initial design flaws. One of those was called the Lee, and the other was called the Grant. The division was a little informal and somewhat interchangeable, and I think in some places one name became more popular than the other. Like, I think the Russians, when they weren't calling this just garbage to be disposed of, or the Coffin for many brothers, I think they favored Grant over Lee for formal designation, when they weren't just calling it an M3 Light. When they weren't calling to have it towed away. Another backhanded positive, while the vehicle was dangerously tall and bad at taking cover, the interior was very spacious as a result, so once you stripped the weaponry out of it, it made a very good, like, office for mobile HQs. You could just set up a nice desk in there. Put the kettle on. Have a nice, roomy, comfortable place in which to lay out all your maps and strategies. Yeah, like the Grant switched over to welded hull and various other features. There we go, after getting, the prototyping of the first wheel assembly out of the way, the rest are coming together much better. The benefits of having all those points of contact between the two halves, once you have 2 or 3 of them settled in, then mathematically the rest of them have to be lined up, or the part you have is grievously deformed. And for us, that has not been the case, so fine, even clicking. There we go! Road wheels. Falling together. I will make sure to keep them firmly rotated all throughout the coming times. Some of them, in particular this one, are at high risk of getting gummed. The perils of adhesives, when all of your parts are made of the same material. Let's give this one a bit of a quick preventative scraping. Floss your tank. Now that's ingenuity. Next generation fighting vehicle right there. The future of warfare. Oh, and the Screwmobile. Yes, that's another good one. Yep, screw treads. That's an actual technology that works quite well at the thing it is intended to do. Just has the unfortunate side effect of making anything that employs it complete anathema to paved roads. If you want something, if you want to make a heavy vehicle very quickly cross a swamp, just apply screws. Or acting particularly gummy. I'll do just one round of degumming here, and then attempt to move on to the idler wheels and the drives and so forth. This one's particularly bad. Alright, that should be alright for now. Just have to be sure that this one receives a great deal of care and attention. This is our one at-risk road wheel. Could become terminally gummed. So, back to the sprue for parts, as it's time to build idlers and drive sprockets. So, many more little insertable bits. The number 5s here are for the sprockets. And the others are for the idlers. And with that snip, we have handily depleted the first sprue. Very succinct layout. We have not yet reached the human sprue. That will remain for a future effort. Alright, so I just need to pile these together. I'll be sure to give them a cleaning up first, but this is all pretty straightforward bit assembling. Those inserts go in there, then the sprockets come together. And these, use these two to join them appropriately. Well, they don't join into each other, it'll end up with idler wheel and with thing sticking out of the side of it. Some manner of axle. Just gotta stay vigilant. We're not gonna lose you, Road Wheel. Everyone's here for you. Look at your buddy on the other end. He's doing great. The sprockets came out fine. Just need to file down the sides of our little pegs. Yes, boundlessly creative. Just take the engine off and you have a perfectly good shed. Right, so with these, it's this bit first, and this bit over top of it. With the tapered end sticking out. That tapered end sticking down. Yes, that is the case. So it's like this into there, and then this over top of it. Yep. And that is kind of short on ways that it can go wrong. I say as I prepare to open up fully with the tube. The unsinkable M3 Lee. There's how it could go wrong. Those things have sides to them. There's a bit they're expecting to latch onto. Fortunately, all is well. Scooch in there, fellow. Okay, idler wheels. You know what you're doing. You were born ready for this. That's a fine parade float you found there. Modified garbage truck? Back to the improvised applicator, so I can be sure that I'm applying material in vague moderation. The most precise degree. Oh, really? What is supposed to make sure this part can rotate freely? We have perhaps gummed it. Whatever. Full speed ahead. If necessary, this can just become a display lead. Like, really, both these parts being entombed inside of a larger piece, why would they even rotate? Enough of this. No time for moderation. There's a war on. Drive sprockets, I'm about ready to declare you working as designed. Let's go ahead and label that a feature. Will not fix. So what else can we get around to throwing together while continuing to babysit this one damaged road wheel? The drive sprocket we can take or leave, but we're not losing you, road wheel. Everyone's depending on you. Alright, we will be building a panel. I'm going after some parts on sprues A and B. There's our foundation. Getting distracted from part hunting by all these excellent goggles. Alright, there we go. Part 23. Some little bits of exhaust piping. Which, irritatingly, I may as well just go ahead and brandish the sprue up there. Look at this. Look at those two slightly different connection points that are just wedged right in next to each other. Got it, though. That and its neighbors were... Looks like we're largely assembling exhaust here. Alright, that's everything needed. Off the A sprue. And now we have some fiddly bits to collect off of B. A couple of B23s, these fellows here, these little horseshoes. And a pair of 34s. It's these. Very small little hooks. There we go. All pieces clipped for the next phase. Alright, it seems to be getting through the worst of its risk of gum. Alright, so this panel gets kind of intricate. Let's be sure that everything is appropriately oriented to make sense of it. So all of our hook bits along over on that side. These fellows go into those notches there, and those latch into them in turn. Exhaust piping situated itself in the middle there. And these are just supposed to, like, physically clip on to those bits. They will not be adhered. These fellows. Those will be glued onto the framework. The others will not. Right, so these, yeah, that's the appropriate sides for them. And then those pipes hook into them in turn. Alright, so our series of events to bring this part together. which I initiate before making any attempt to clean any of the bits and burrs off of the edges of our associated parts. I can, as though I'd planned it all along, sneak that in after I have this tapped down and starting to set. There you go, friend. See, that's parallelizing. Making time work in my favor. So actually, let me think about it a moment about the shape that these need to end up in. Like that, or the other way around. Like so, with these ends here, if I can just go and throw that up against the camera again there. Yeah, that little opening there, that's the actual exhaust ports. And then the top of that pokes up into the appropriate muffler, and that squarish bit there notches into the appropriate space there on the panel. See, you're doing fine, Wheels. Just believe in yourself. Those need to go on with their beaks facing that way. Whack. Also, that's a finally there. Yeah, the cast hull ones, they're all weird and smooth and lumpy. Ours is inappropriately angular, and appropriately square, rigid, patriotic, shrapnel-laden death trap. Oh yeah, I was considering repositioning the camera to look at the whole workspace from like, the other angle over there. Perhaps next time will be different. We work with the camera we have, not the camera we want. This is the Lend-Lease camera angle. We have a much better model that will be arriving sometime next year. You sign up for premium membership to the Allied Forces. Alright. Carefully attach muffler. And again for the other side. And once those have had a moment to set, then we add the rest of the exhaust system. And as always, properly inspect gummy wheels, which are becoming progressively less gummy with each passing rotation. Healthy road wheels start at home. Can't wait to see how gluing the internals of these together is going to spin about and harm me in some way. Dire portents await. There will be ways to intervene in order to correct that. We can conduct tank surgery of some sort. And since those don't even glue on, I can just leave them aside and attempt to snap them into position at whatever time I so please. I'm just gonna go ahead and stand this panel up. And apply the gunk to my 2 points of contact for a piece. Come on, motherfucker. You only have one place to go. No time for excuses. There's a war on. That is a beautiful monstrosity of machinery. The engine this vehicle deserves. Oh, gone and knocked a hook over. Get back here, you. Don't you dare desert your post. Marvelous. That's doing your part. These adventures, tiny plastic shenanigans, are made possible by that URL and persons who touch it. Appropriately invoke its powers to put numbers on a page. I should scale down that logo in response to... Right, it's a shorter string now. It's a different name. Something like that. Yeah, that's proportioned. Sort of. minute layout misalignments like this one are made possible by that URL. How fragile these little hooks are in terms of their connection. Should really stop compulsively nudging the one I have there. And let this piece settle down to cure, to set, to rest, to become more good with time. And that leaves us having finished a couple of discrete parts as we... No, it's a bit of not gonna launch into spool down preamble yet. I could throw together another piece of something, as I noticed that one of those little hook bits just flung itself off the table by adhering to my hand. Stand by. Devious little critter. So let's create another piece. Of course! What better to... Well, I guess hypothetically they want me to start paying attention to side panels, fenders, and other unimpressive. Forget that. We go to the gun. Next piece, 75mm cannon. Let it be constructed. More fiddly bits of fending and side paneling can go into the start of the next session. For now, a cannon. Let's see. We need our barrel. There we need our muzzle. We need our sponson. Our swivel mount. And finally, I don't think this block corresponds to any actual fancy technical piece, it's just a backing plate that's holding the segment together. We need a slab of metal, as represented by a much smaller slab of plastic. And so to build. look over all parts and conduct the cleaning off of them in advance. They have a seam running lengthwise down the barrel of this gun. Terrible. A sponson. That was their bright idea for how we're going to mount this weapon on this vehicle. We don't have what we need to make a turret that could hold this gun. So don't worry about it. We'll just sponson it. Sponsons. Shameful. Oh, how this whole assemblage will come together. We'll just go ahead and review visibly before committing to bits and pieces. So, inside of the back of the sponson there, you can see there's a lovely notch. Our mount fits snugly. Lighting, come on right here. Yeah, there we go. Fits snugly into that notch and will be allowed to swivel freely, vertically. That plate will adhere on over the back of it, but not to the extent that it actually fuses with and obstructs that swivel. And then gun goes in slot. Yeah, that plate is sitting in the position of where all of that miscellaneous machinery you can see there on the properly extracted sponson would go. All the rest of the cannon, the breech and all of that, the mouth of the gun, you know, where you put the gun food. Oh, so, this is actually a little kind of strangely interesting. So, yeah, that little muzzle piece that we have on there, I guess, only exists for, like, space considerations on the sprue. Because, let it focus there. Yeah, it's the same caliber as the rest of the cannon, appropriate since that is, you can see there, there's not really any appreciable bulge around the tip of it. It's just there to slightly extend the gun. They just couldn't make the base piece that couple millimeters longer. There. Alright, that's you into position. Let's go ahead and get mount in place. Understanding all the ways that I could more safely handle these parts will not prevent me from barging forward recklessly. But all do abandon. Look, as long as we know the hazards, we're basically invincible. That's just step one of fighting. Know the enemy, and then you're done. As long as they're not a mystery, they can't get you. Learn their true name. You will be protected from their spells. Alright, I'll have to let this plate settle as well, since it's also there to limit how far vertically the gun can traverse, a limit that would be created by that extra bulk of machinery in the back. And finally, let's get the gun itself into its new home. I've applied perhaps more goo than necessary to bring this gun to a rest in its mounting. We can correct this through methods. Guest appearance by patriotic Lend-Lease biker neighbor. Let's go ahead and appropriate one of these sponge on a stick. That will need some extensive cleaning off, but that can happen during the finishing and sanding of the rest of the model. As long as none of the important moving parts fuse together, everything will be serviceable. I'm just adding texture to it. That's going to make it more natural and worn looking. And eventually decorate. Yeah, I'm gonna have to babysit this thing as well to be sure it doesn't fuse. There's noticeable amounts of goo on the sides. Want to be very careful about it. Would not want this to end up smedged in place. Wait, which side of this is up? I think this way? Yeah, that seems more sensible. A gun! Expect such fiddling to continue for many a span of time after the, well, what is now, now we can begin the winding up to the cooling down of the session that we did in another part and effectively conducted spans of time. And what a fine selection of initial parts we have for just getting off to a start here. We throw together road wheels, fighting wheels, driving sprockets. Lovely rear panel and friends. That's still a little misaligned. I'll try to clip those on there after an appropriate span of waiting for things to dry and firmly fuse together. Quad machine gun sponsons, that sounds excellent. What a beautiful weapon. Why couldn't we have had more of those? Cutting edge, innovative devices. Yeah, look at that fine Sponsonian architecture. So yeah, so we'll put extensive efforts into making sure that all these moving parts we have so far don't gum up. Possibly do a bit of forethinking about how adhering those might be against design and waiting to sabotage us and start working on an appropriate countermeasure. And otherwise, yeah, mark the beginnings of next miniature thing. Tank. Boat of land. There it is. There you go. Tank. We got it. It's good. It's hull down. Seems entrenched. Look, we all know that the next war is just going to be, you know, fought around static entrenchments. We don't. It's a support vehicle. It's just going to, you know, push forward along lines, cut barbed wire. Of course, that joke doesn't particularly play. This was built after it was understood that that element of things was wrong. Just not yet the other half of Sponson. Like, just look at it. I've just laid it here. Like, this is the top piece of the hull here. So, yeah, here's your tank. Here's your main gun. And I guess be sure to only approach your enemy from the left. Because, like, yeah, you got your blind spot of this. All of it. Like, even against something that's kind of straight ahead of you, you're still disadvantaged over things that had, like, non-turreted, but, you know, centrally forward-mounted guns that would just be able to, like, swivel at a decent degree of angle from which way did you point your vehicle. Here you have from about here to, I don't know, maybe it could get out as far as that. Hard to tell though without knowing, because, like, naturally there's all the other machinery in there. There's a tiny man standing behind this sponson trying to operate it. He needs to not be crushed by all the hydraulic moving parts as he shifts it about. If only that gun could be up here at this other spot where there's going to be a full 360 pivot about on hydraulics thing that could look in all directions. That would be glorious, but for a 75mm gun? No, that's a flight of fancy. Impossible. Beyond all human imagination. Fine start to smithing. Terribly mediocre vehicle. And also that very nice poster. Look at that poster. It's a fine fan work, that poster together. Like, there. Movement in three-dimensional space. A fine poster. And an adequate tank.